American history. The beginning of the first period can be considered the year 1607. In this time, Jamestown was founded, which became the first successful English colony established in North America. The end of the period is marked by 1783, when the War of Independence concluded and the United States gained freedom. As the English colonies in North America developed, democracy gradually took shape, eventually culminating in the independence of the United States. At the same time, democracy was severely violated by the entrenchment of African Americans' status as slaves. The political and cultural values of the American nation were formed during this era. Already then, America appeared to many nations as a role model. Initially, people tried to follow the Americans in religious matters, but after the War of Independence, the United States became a political example to follow. At first, the United States consisted of 13 colonies, each of which had significant differences in governance, population composition, and methods of farming. Yet despite ideological disagreements between leaders and settlers, they managed to find compromise and form a unified, independent, and strong state that grew more successful each year. Key events of the first period. 1620, the voyage of the Mayflower. On the ship Mayflower, Puritan settlers arrived in North America for the first time. These people refused to recognize the authority of the Anglican Church, which was one of the main reasons for their migration. In the future, this relocation of dissenters to a continent free of church prejudices would turn into a mass movement. 1692, the Salem witch trials. This event became historically known as the witch hunt. 19 women were hanged, while more than 200 women were imprisoned on charges of witchcraft. Several of the imprisoned died in jail. 17th century Protestant teachings. The period of the spread of Protestant teachings, which called for sincerity in religious feelings, became known as the Great Awakening. As a result, most settlers rejected the atheistic ideas of the Enlightenment that were popular in Europe at that time. 1754 to 1763, the French and Indian War. For almost 10 years, a bloody war raged between the English and the French. As a result, France was completely expelled from North America. A new conflict then arose between the English colonists and the British Crown, which attempted to compensate for war expenses at the colonists' expense. 1776, the Declaration of Independence. At the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, representatives of the 13 colonies participated. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776, a year after the War of Independence had begun. It would take another 7 years before the United States fully secured independence. Important historical figures of the first period. John Winthrop, 1587/88 to 1649. The first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which he himself founded. He proclaimed that the colony was a city upon a hill, a model of faith and hope for all believers. Anne Hutchinson, 1591 to 1643, leader of the Antinomian heresy, formed in opposition to Puritan rule in Massachusetts. She was condemned for her ideas, expelled, and later killed by Native Americans. Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, one of the founding fathers, a polymath, diplomat, writer, and publisher. He coined the famous phrase, "Time is money." George Washington, 1732 to 1799, commander of the Continental Army during the Revolution and the first president of the United States, 1789 to 1797. Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826, philosopher, diplomat, political leader, and author of the Declaration of Independence. He later served as President of the U.S., 1801 to 1809. The second period, nation building, 1783 to 1860. The second period, called the nation building era, began in 1783, when the United States successfully won independence and freed itself from external influence. The period ended in 1860 with the secession of several southern states. This time was marked by territorial expansion and economic growth, accompanied by internal contradictions. Through wars, purchases, and treaties, the U.S. acquired its continental borders. Water and railway transportation began to develop. The U.S. represented a balance between the South, which prospered through enslaved African labor, and the North, which sought to compete for the rapidly developing West. The South earned profits from plantations, while the North gained influence through industry. Meanwhile, the abolitionist movement against slavery grew stronger. The rapid expansion of U.S. territory raised disputes about whether new lands would be free or slaveholding. The conflict, especially after the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, eventually led to the Civil War. Key events of the second period. 1789, U.S. Constitution adopted. The Articles of Confederation proved ineffective. In 1787, a special constitutional convention was convened to draft a new constitution. By 1789, it was ratified by two-thirds of the states, allowing presidential and congressional elections to take place. Other states joined after the Bill of Rights. 10 amendments guaranteeing individual freedoms was added. 1801, presidential transition. Thomas Jefferson was elected president. Although his radical ideas frightened many, outgoing President John Adams peacefully handed over power, setting a precedent for democratic transitions. 1803, Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson expanded U.S. territory by purchasing vast lands from France, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada, doubling the nation's size. 1812 to 1815, War of 1812 with Britain. The U.S. declared war, hoping to annex Canada and end Britain's forced recruitment of American sailors. The war ended without territorial gains, though Americans claimed victory after the Battle of New Orleans. 1830, Indian Removal Act. Native tribes, including the Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, were forcibly relocated to present-day Oklahoma. This journey, known as the Trail of Tears, caused massive death and suffering. 1846 to 1848, Mexican-American War. The war, sparked by the U.S. annexation of Texas, ended with the U.S. acquiring half of Mexico's territory, including California and the Southwest. 1848, Seneca Falls Convention. The first women's rights convention took place in Seneca Falls. Activists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, signed the Declaration of Sentiments, proclaiming equality between men and women.